Bruchim Aboim B'Shem Hashem B'Shem Egen Shir Torah. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir from Rabbi Smith. Today's shir is on difficult Kibbudav situations. That was great. So this is sponsoring a shir called Egen Shir Torah at 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. Rav Smith.
Today's sugya started with a seemingly simple shaila, where someone said he heard, quote unquote, that a child, a son, should not give the father a haircut. And the assumption was that because often when a haircut is given, it causes the person to bleed, in this case the parent to bleed. And as we'll see, there's a issur causing a parent to bleed. Now when I looked into the sugya, I found the Rishonim say this. We'll soon see one of the Balei HaTosfos says this. And I was a chiddush, people are mekel, and the question is why. And then we really heard other questions on the same sugya about giving a injection, a needle to a parent that's necessary, or parents that have they are diabetic and they have to have a prick, they have to test their blood occasionally. Can a son do that, cause the parent to bleed? Of course, for a benefit of the parent. And before long we had close to 24 shilas about this. Interestingly enough, the title is very indicative of the issue. Very difficult Kibbudav question, and I'll explain. Because as we should know, hopefully we do know, as Yishalmi in the beginning of Pei refers to Kibbudav as chamura shebechamurais. I mean, that alone, that we find it in the Aseres HaDibros, speaks volumes of what Kibbudav is all about. But what's much worse is when a child causes a parent to bleed. And that's really our sugya, ranging from haircuts to pricks, to surgery, as we'll see. But basically, we're talking about something very serious. Now, let me be bayis before we start. Today's sugya, like all of Kibbudav, applies to men and women, to sons and daughters. The Torah says, Shulchan Aruch says, it's clearly echad in your Yerdei Reish Mem Yudzayin, echad ha'ish, echad ha'isha, shavim bekibud uvemayra avaim. In other words, today's shir is negayah to sons and daughters. But since we're talking to men, we'll talk about men, but it's huadin, daughters. Daughters caring for elderly parents have the same shilas. And also, just like the Torah says in 4 different places, there is absolutely no difference between Kibbudav or Kibbudaim. It's all one. Again, we're talking to men about men, but huadin, a daughter to a mother. So the question basically is, why are we so concerned about this issue? He's doing it for the benefit of the parent. So the makar of this sugya for today is in Parashat Mishpatim Chaf Aleph Pasuk Tezvav, Make Ava Ve'imai Mois Yumas. It's rare that we have a share about Chiyav Misa, but that's today's sugya. And Rashi explains, which is really based on a Gemara, that even though hitting another yid is an issur, even lifting a hand to another yid is a rasha, but Make Ava Ve'imai is the level of chenek, according to some, is one of the most chamadik misas bezdin. And indeed, the Mishnah in the beginning of Elo and Echnakim, that's Sanhedrin Pei Daled Amud Beis, Elo and Echnakim, and the first one that gets chenek is Makkah Ava Ve'imai. The Gemara does qualify that, and that's Sanhedrin Pei Daled Amud Beis on the bottom, that it doesn't mean hitting a parent. It means if it causes it to bleed, rakah that has a chavala. Even if he didn't damage the parent, but as we'll see, a mere tipas dam, that a child causes the parent to bleed, that is Makkah Ava Ve'imai Mois Yumas. Now that again speaks volumes of the chamura shebechamurais. A few psukim later, we see, I guess, another expression of chamura shebechamurais, and that is in Pasuk Yudzayin, Mekalel Ava Ve'imai Mois Yumas. Cursing is Mois Yumas. Rashi says Beskila. Skila is certainly the most chamadika issa, the most chamadika misas bezdin. So we have 2 chiyuvei misa regarding parents. The chinuch and mitzvah memches explains that the shirish of this issa of Makav ve'imai, to give musa to the nevalim, to have a dare. How dare you lift a hand to a parent? You know, The parents gave you everything that you need, and you dare raise a hand to a parent. And this is the Shitasoi, the Chinuch and Mitzvah Lamed Gimel explains that the side of Kibbudav is Hakaras HaTov, and you have to do everything to show gratitude to parents, but to be a mechutzev and hit a parent and cause to bleed, that's Mois Yumas. The Rambam and Mar Nevuchim Gimel Mem Aleph calls it Roiv Ha'azos, that there is a person hits a parent. It's interesting, the Ramban and on the pasuk on Makkah Ava Ve'ima, he explains why Mekal is so chama more than Makkah, because a person gets angry and he says something. But we have to be very careful to protect that attitude, that reaction. Tzricha issur gadol, we need a major deterrent that shouldn't happen. But be that as it may, in this world that we live in that is sort of abandoned the concept of Kibbudav, it's something an archaic, old-fashioned practice, Rachmana litzlan. For us, it's the Chamura Shebechamura, is one of the Aseres Adibras, and two Mois Yumas. What's noteworthy, the Ramah in Hilchos Shabbos Shin Mem Gimel Aleph quotes a Trumas Hadeshen that really a katan that doesn't have Aveira Abikatnusa is not really held accountable because he's not a bardas. But the Ramah says, but a katan that becomes a gadol and remember that he hit his father when he was young should do tshuva on it. They say the Noam Melech did tshuva when he aggravated his mother when he was nursing. As a tzaddik for an anhaga. But basically, you wonder, well, if he did it as a katan, he's pata. What's the problem? Teretz says it seems that a person can't go on a life with any blemish in Kibbudav, even if he did else katan. But we see a little more regarding this issur makav ve'imoy, and that is Gemara in Bava Kama Peivav, and I'll quote the lashon of the Shulchan Aruch and Reish Mem Aleph Beis. Hiko al oznoi v'chorshay. A person hit his parent on the ear, and they became deaf. So Avad is a terrible act. In fact, in Hilchos Choshen Mishpat, there's a lot of payment to making someone deaf. But Zok Mechaba, based on the Gemara Chayev Misa. If a person makes someone else deaf, he has to pay. He makes a parent deaf, he's Chayev Misa. Why? Zok Mechaba, again, based on the Meferish Gemara, She efshe sheyasa cheresh b'loy chabura k'tipas hadam yoytzim mifnim ba'oizin v'aydezen is charesh. So the Gemara and the Mechaba are telling us a medical fact. When someone hits someone else's ear and he becomes deaf, it has to be that it caused internal bleeding. And there was at least a drop of blood that somehow affected the operation of the ear. And that's why the parent became deaf. So that's, and again, a lesson for itself. But we see from here something very important. How much dam do you need to be over on Makkah of V'ima Mois Yumas? Mechaba's lashon is tipas dam. But there's more than that. Because we understand bleeding means if it starts to bleed and you see the blood. The Yishalmi in Sanhedrin, the beginning of Perikut Aleph, has a shaila. Makkah v'imoy, is that like Makkah, another person in Hilchos Nezikin? Or is that like Chabura on Shabbos? What's the nafkamina? So the Yishalmi, when it comes to making a Chabura on Shabbos, even internal bleeding, what we call a black and blue mark, but that's really internal bleeding, on Shabbos, the Mechaba says, is Grad and Shin, Tezai and Siv Ches, if a person makes a makkah and bleeds internally, he's also chayiv on chabura. But regarding nezikin, that's not true. There has to be a hezek, and internal bleeding is not a hezek. So the Shalmi has a shayla, how about a person hits a parent and he causes a black and blue mark? And by the way, black and blue mark is the product of internal bleeding, where the veins burst and the blood comes out, but doesn't burst forth, it's internal bleeding. So the Shalmi has a shayla, but the Bavli in Bava Kama is clear. Says the Nitziv and Emek Sha'ala, Parish Mishpat and Siman Samach Sivkot and Tess, very excited to Keshiltis B'chlal. But the Nitziv points out from the Gemara in Bava Kama, we see even internal bleeding is Mois Yumas. And the Heintika Paisim and Chaz Yitzchak and Chaz Shloima both say the same thing. So now we see an additional Chahima. Actually, two Chumrais. First of all, lav dafka, revius, or kazayis of blood, even tipas dam, and even internal bleeding. Now, oy bazoi, so what's the shayla? Even a mere prick, which takes just a drop of blood, is tipas dam. And certainly a child to make surgery on a parent, man dechar shmei, if there's so much bleeding. But we're going to suggest the following. Enechanami, a son, has to be an insane son, that hits a parent with malicious intent, b'mezid, that's mois yumas, if there's bleeding. But in our case, he's a very kind son. The parents need an injection, they need a prick, they need a surgery, and the parents want their son, the American dream, my son the doctor. And now when I need him, he can't do it, he's from, I want my son to do it. So it's not a chavola, it's not a rishis. And maybe we'll even say, we could base it on a Gemara. Machaban Yeridei Reish Mem Yotes, but it's a Ferish Gemara. Of shemachal al kvoidei machal. Parent could say, I'm moichel, and it's kilas kabalti. So maybe the same thing we'll say regarding makav v'imay. Of course you can't hit a parent, but if the parent wants, so mechila helps. And the emes like the chinuch's reason that it's akar satoiv, and that's why the issur is a lack of akar satoiv. Here, son, the akar satoiv is to do what the parent needs. And this seems to be the shita of the Minchas Chinuch. In Mitzvah Mem Ches Yivka and Gimel, he says a chiddush. He himself admits he didn't find this any other place, but he says asvar noisenes, and it's borer that when does the issur makav av ve'imay apply? If he does it without rishus. But if the parents give rishus to do it, it would be mutter. And it includes emphatically mechila. It's a mitzvah lakoisai, or mitzvah lakoisai, I'm sorry. Nira, there is no issur. I did see one of the achrayim say this lashon. If the parent wants it, it goes from an issur to a mitzvah of Kibbudav. Now, obviously, the Minchas Chinuch does not mean that he hit first and then ask rishus. That won't help. But if he gave rishus initially, there's no issur. However, this is hard to accept, and we could say, bayis mikra, bayis mesvara. Bayis mesvara, it's really hard to understand what the Minchas Chinuch means. Because bishleima, when it comes to kibud, that's the parent's rights. I have a right to ask my son for a tea. Now let's say I see it's too hard, I'm moichelim. So it's my rights, I'm the bailim, to ask for it and be moichel. But Rabbi Yid, issur chenek is not your rights. That's a pasuk in the Torah, makavim mois yumas. Mi samchal ish, who gave you the right to let your child be over on misas chenek? Ibayis ema kra. I'll tell you something else. Because it's true that of shemachal al kvoidei machal. How about of shemachal al bezyoini? Let's say the father says, what, be mavazim. You're in a bad mood, let it out. Just say whatever you want. And the son, he's into Kibbudav, and he tells them everything bad about the father. So this is a Kesef Mishnah, interesting, in the end of Hilchos Talmud Torah, he's not talking about Kibbudav. He quotes a Rivash, one of the Rishonim, in the end of Siman Reish Chaf. They're talking about Rav Shemachal al Kvoidei Machal. But says the Rivash and the Kesef Mishnah passes like this, but a Rav Shemachal al Bezyoinai ain't Bezyoinai Machal. Why? This Svara. Because it's still a terrible Bezyoin. And his proof, listen to this, the Raya is, we know of Shemachal al Kvoidei Machal, but it's Pashit Zok the Kesef Mishnah quoting the Rivash, that the son can't say Divir Cherufim v'Gidufin, even though the father is Meichel, because al Bezyoina you can't be Meichel. So who adin Bezayin for Rebbe? Now he's talking about a Rebbe, but the assumption for the Pashit is regarding Kibbudav of Shemachal al Bezyoini ain't Bezyoini Machal. And Daka the Shultis in Parshas Mishpatim, that's from High Goyin, he speaks about hitting a parent, Makavi Mois Yumas, and he says that even though of Shemachal al Kvoidei Machal, but regarding hitting or Makalel, Mechil doesn't help. Now this Shiltis from Rabbi Goyin is a direct hit on the Minchas Chinuch. Minchas Chinuch says it helps Mechila, and here we see clearly it doesn't. But the point, the Chayr is Pashit. If the parent is moicha on a cup of tea, there's no bezayin, and I know you didn't gain, you didn't lose, so you're back to square one. But mechila on bezayin doesn't take away the bezayin of it. He stands and says, Cherufa v'gidufin, that's intolerable. So therefore, we understand now that of shemachal k'vaydi machal, and some taka say even on moira, machal, but not on bezayin. No. If bezayin doesn't help mechila, kal v'choim and kolshkein, regarding makav, even mois yumas doesn't help. So now the menchas chinuch is taka very schwer. But there is one point to consider regarding our shilas, and that is, like I mentioned earlier, but now I'll try to bring it out a little better. If the son is mavaza the parent with rishus, it's still a bezayin. You can't change bezayin. Our case is not a makkah, it's not a bezayin. The parent needs a surgery, and they only have trust in their son, the doctor. It's not makkah b'rishus. He's doing it for their benefit. It's not makkah, it's a chesed. I'll give you a mashal, the sabres ha'oizim. Let's say a person has an advanced state of yana machla and he's in deep trouble. There's a very kind doctor, he's an expert of all experts. He's willing to do a surgery for free, and he's going to succeed in saving the patient's life. So right before he starts the incision, the nurse starts yelling, "Don't you dare hurt that patient. You're not allowed to hurt a ear. You're not allowed to even lift a hand to hurt a patient. But to make a cut, don't you dare hurt me or Reitzayach." So it's time for that nurse to retire. He's not hurting the patient, he's saving his life, right? No one looks at a surgery like hakah and chavala, but you're allowed to do it because pekuach nefesh. It's a mitzvah. So l'chayr, the same applies to Kibbudav. If he's mavaza with rishus, but at the end of the day it's still bezayin. But a surgery or a injection, it's not a ma'aser hakah. I mean, it is, and it's bleeding, a lot of bleeding, but he's doing it l'toiv asam. So it's not an issur doichaloisa say. It's not an issur. And I could do better. There's a inspiring Yishalmi in Peah, in Perik Aleph. The Yishalmi tells a story with drama, in fact, that the mother of Yishmael came to the yeshiva and complained about her son, that Yishmael, that he has no Kibbudav, Kibbudav, I should say. So if you know the Gemara in Kedushin, you have Yishmael's incredible Kibud aim. When his mother had to get him on a bed and she couldn't reach the bed, so he would bend down and become a human stepping stool. And now they hear complaints about Rabbi Yishmael, so their face turned pale, and they ask, what is he doing? He goes, that mechutz of what he is. When he comes home from yeshiva, I want to wash his feet and drink the water from his heilige feet, and he doesn't let me. Now mechutz. So the Rabbanan called the Yishmael and said, listen, this is extenuating circumstances. Let her do it. Let her wash your feet and drink the water. Hu ritzayna, hu kvaida. And that's the famous quote, ritzayna shel adam zui kvaida. So maybe that also applies here. If the parent wants this surgery or this prick or this injection, it's not pshat that it's a bezayin, a yemoichel, nishmoichel. It's not a bezayin. It's a mitzvah. So before we apply this, because the truth is it is milsa de mistavra, let's learn a shtickle of Gemara. The Gemara, actually the Mishnah Sanhedrin Pei Dalet on Beis, I told you earlier, says Maka over imay bechenek. Comes again the Gemara, iboyulu whoever shayla ben mau sheyakis dom la'aviv. Now you have to know a little bit of history. There was an old-fashioned refuah officially. And when someone was sick, they would make his dam. Make his dam means they drew bloodletting, Letting, like let, they took out blood. And the assumption was that if he has too much blood, that's why he's sick, take out blood, and he'll be okay. But hakazas dam that we have to know is, it was a refuah. It was a medical procedure. So the Gemara has a shayla, let's say the father needs an hakazas dam, and his son knows how to do it. Can a son be make his dam? Now what's the shayla? What do you mean what's the shayla? He's making them bleed, and a lot of blood. But this is our shayla. It's not surgery, it's hakazas dam. But here the refuah was making moitzi dam, and that's the Mara shayla. So the Mara says, Rav Master said it's a fair shapasik. That's why it's mutter. So we're looking at the Mara, what's pshat? It's talking not about a father. So Rashi says a pashta hezba. What does it mean what's the gauge to know what yes and what not? You don't want someone to make a joke about you, don't make it about him. And that's a very good gauge to know what yes and what not. So Rav Masa is applying that to Kibbudav. Let's say you would be the elderly father and you need a surgery, and you ask your son, could you make a surgery? And son says, no, Kibbudav. Would you be happy, or would you want the son to do it? If you want him to do it, then do it to your father. If you would be a father, would you want our cousins down by your son? Yeah, let the son do it. So Rav Masna has no problem with making a parent bleed for a medical procedure. Basically, so I think according to Rav Masna, not only it's mutter, it's a mitzvah, Kibbudav. The second reason, says the Gemara, Rav Dimi says, the pasuk Maka Adam v'meis mois yumas, or Maka Adam may have to pay, and Maka Behema, lahavdol. So he makes the comparison. Ma Maka Behema l'refuah pata, af Maka Adam l'refuah pata. Now this is a little of a mild approach. He's not saying it's a mitzvah, but if you hit a parent, chas v'shalom, for no reason, mois yumas. You hit a parent or make a parent bleed l'refuah, is mutter. Two reasons why it's perfectly mutter. So if the Gemara would have ended here, we would have early dismissal today. Finished. Mutter, period, pricks, surgery, no chilik. But then the Gemara continues. Rav le'shavik lebrei le'mishkel le'siluyeh. Rav's had a splinter, and it's typically, you have to get it out. He did not allow his son to take it out, because maybe he'll make him bleed. Marbre Darvina had a pus pimple, and you remember the Gemara, Mapis Mursa, they would puncture it. He didn't let his son puncture the pimple, because it would make it bleed. So now we have a problem. We have two svaras, the Gemara says, Rav and Rav Masna, why it's perfectly mutter, and two Ma'aser Rav of Heilig Amarayim that didn't allow our children to do it. Now, we don't need a teretz to a steer, we need a hemshech in the Gemara. I mean, it's more basic than that. Where's the flow of the Gemara? In fact, the Turi Evan, that's the Shagisari Seif on Megillah Chav Ches, he's talking about Rav Shemachal al Bezoyinai, but he says that on Bezoyin Rebbe doesn't help, just like it doesn't help on Maka Aviv Birishus, and he proves from the Gemara Rav and Marbre Darvina. Now this Shagis Aryeh, this Turi Evan, is also a direct hit on the Minchas Chinuch. If Rav and Marbre Darvina didn't allow their children to make medical procedures, even though it's Bereshus, is a Raya, Bereshus doesn't help. So now we have a major steer in the Gemara, but you can't even call it a steer, it's the same Gemara. So if you ask me, Taka, what's Takabsha? Why should it be Asa, even though he's doing it L'Tayvasa? So like I told you, you're not the Bailim on Makavi Mois Yumas. I'll give you a dogma. The Gemara asks an interesting question. The Gemara says, okay, so a son can't take out a splinter from a father because he might cause bleeding. And let's say he asks his friend to do it, but even a friend can't make a yid bleed. It's a lav. Pentaisid. So why could you ask someone else? So Gemara, what kind of kash is that? If someone else does it and starts to bleed, the shiggas lav. Okay. But if a son does it, it's shiggas chenek. See, those are key words for today. We're dealing with shiggas chenek. In fact, the Gemara goes weiter. We know that you could take out a splinter on Shabbos. If you do it carefully, it's not a psik reisha. That's shiggas skila. The Gemara says, no. If you plan to take out the splinter and it starts to bleed inadvertently, it's makalkal. So the shiggas makalkal. But Kibbudav aim is shiggas chenek. So the Gemara is highlighting the challenge of the sugya. Because in the best scenario, it's shiggas chenek. You can't reduce that. And this is the chaymer of chenek. He's doing it as Kibbudav, but who said Kibbudav justified? Again, a mashal is sabes oizim. A father comes to his son's house, says, I would love to have a tea, I really have a sore throat, please get me a tea. And the son is overjoyed, Kibbudav. He runs to the urn, and the plug is out. Someone pulled out the plug. So he says, okay, Kibbudav, chamur, said Kibbudav, I'm going to plug the plug in and cook water on Shabbos. Chas v'shalom, right? So who says Kibbudav is daicha makavimai? So here we have two interesting ways of looking at the sugya, and in the Gemara Gufa there's an inconsistency. So on a simple level, and that's the way the Rif and the Rush, two of the Gedoyle Rishayim, the Gedoyle Machriyim, they both learned that it's Taka Machloikis. Rav and Rav Masna felt it's mutter, but Ma'aser Rav came along and said, no, it's awesome. Rav and Marbre Dravina, they held it's awesome. So the way the Rif and Rush use the same lashon, iboilahu, but ala sikna, that you're not allowed to do it. So according to this, says the Beis Yosef, it's taka machloikis in the Gemara, but the maskana is it's awesome to cause a parent to bleed, even l'refuah. And I guess the hezbollah is shigigas chenek. And you're talking a very impressive combination. Don't forget the Rambam paskind based on 3 gedolei rishonim. Rambam, Rif, and Rush. And here, 2 of the 3 already hold it's asagama. Now, there could be a different way of learning the Gemara, which taka, if you learn the Gemara, it flows a little easier. And that is that it's not a machlokes. Avada, if there's no other choice, and the son has to do it, the son does it. But here, taking out a splinter is not a refuah. Taking out a splinter without making bleeding. Bursting the pimple, do it carefully. You want to ask your son to do it? Why take a chance? Why walk on a tightrope? Why play around with shigas chenek? Get someone else to take out the splinter, and if it starts to bleed, it's shigas lav, and you're okay. The point is that really, mi'ikadin, if there's no other choice, it's mutter. Let's say it's a question of surgery. There's no efsha'acha. The son is the only one that the parents trust. So the Gemara is saying that approach with extreme caution. Approach with shigas chenek caution. Rav, Marbi Ravina, they got someone else. And that's the shita of the Rambam. In Hilchas Mamre and Perikei Halacha Zayin, the Rambam basically gives over the message that Hamekes Dam La'aviv, or any type of medical procedure, if he does it, even though it's potter, and we'll soon see Beis Yosef, potter means mutter, but lachatchila, if you get someone else do it, why not? If someone else could make his dam, why you do it? But if there's no one else to do it, hareze makis v'choitech kifi mashi yosheyu lasois. So to Beis Yosef, that the Rambam uses the word potter, but it means mutter. In other words, basically, mi'ikadin, it's mutter to do any necessary medical procedure. The svara, I believe, like I told you earlier, it's not a makkah aviv, it's a kibud of aim. But if it could be avoided, why take chances? And this is basically the Rambam shita. In fact, the Ramban, and the Beis Yosef quotes the entire lashon of the Ramban Barichas, the Ramban feels that even the Rif and the Rush hold that if he efshebach is mutter. Now, we have a machlokes gedolei rishonim. If it's mutter, lechatchila, when there's no other choice, or it's mois yumas. It's a pretty serious shayla. How do we paskin? So the Torah now with Siman Reish Mem Aleph brings this halacha and basically quotes the Rambam. Okay, that's the Torah. What does the Shulchan Aruch say? So this is another challenge. The Mechaber in Reish Mem Aleph Gimel has a shayla, this shayla, and all he says is it's asa. Period. He doesn't say by medvar mamurim when it's efshebacha. He left out half of the Torah, and it sounds like he paskins like the Rif and the Rush. That it's asa, period. No exceptions. You could be moichel on your cup of tea, but not on makav v'imay. And taka, this makes sense, because the Shulchan Aruch typically follows Rif and Rush, and here Rif and Rush hold it's asa. So according to this, nothing is mutter. And maybe even a suffix taking out a splinter, which is a suffix, is also a problem. But the Ramah's lashon is very surprising. On the Mechaber's, emphatic lashon asa, b'medvar mamurim, when there's someone else to do it. If there's no one to do it and the father's mitztayer, do whatever you have to do. So the Bach says, what the Beis Yosef, but the Ramah means to say, is, I don't agree to the Mechaber. The Mechaber holds it's us, it's not true. If there's no one else, it's perfectly mutter. And taka, I saw a number of Svardish poiskim say for Achenu Asvardim, there's no heta, not for a prick, and not for an injection, and certainly not for a surgery. Whatever involves a tzaz dam is out of the father's domain to be moichel. However, like I told you, it's interesting because when the Ramah argues on the Mechaber, he typically says v'yesh oimrim. Here he says amad lashon b'medvar mamurim. So it could be, and that's what Gedolei Achronim say, that he's not arguing. The Mechaber typically try to pick a lashon ketzara, so he laid down the law. It's awesome. The Ramah is adding to the Mechaber, If there's no one else to do it, we all agree is mutter. Like the sheet of the Rambam. And Taka, the Ben Ish Chai, it's noteworthy. One of the Gedolei Poiskei Svarad, in Shanabei Shaiftim Chav Dalet, he quotes halachos that are negeya, and here he quotes the whole halacha. He quotes the Mechaba and the Ramah. And doesn't make an issue, Svardim is different. And Taka, it seems that he understood that the Ramah is qualifying the Mechaba, not disagreeing with the Mechaba. And I saw Rabbi Shlomo Zalman doesn't understand this. He says, how do you say that? He doesn't quote the Ben Ish Chai. He mentions it briefly, but he says, what's wrong with saying the Mechaba is Asa, like Rif and Rosh? So for Achenu Asvardim should ask a Shahila. Some Svardish Shabbos say you could be Mekel, like the Ramah, and others say no, the Mechaba was literal. But for us Ashkenazim, if there's no one else to do it, and the father's mitztayer, and he gives Rishus, we'll soon see that always helps, then it's mutter. Now you're wondering, if indeed we hold it's really mutter lechatchila, when there's no one else, so why lechatchila? Why should I do it? Mitzvah bayis mishluchi. I don't want to give up mitzvah Kibbudav. Why should I get someone else lechatchila? The teretz is all agree to the shigas chaynek factor. Don't play around with that. So if you could avoid it, avoid it. So it's an interesting bachra. Mechaba, Ramah, Ashkenazim, Svardim, rule number one is shigas chenek. And that's why even though it's a mitzvah, get someone else. If there's no one else, at least for the Ramah and for Ashkenazim, it's okay. Now, I would be remiss in not mentioning the Minchas Chinuch holds Rishus is mutter. How does he learn the Gemara? Ben Mashi Yaakov Dam La'aviv and Rav and Mar Ravina didn't allow it. So I guarantee the Minchas Chinuch didn't forget the Gemara. And Taka, he mentions it in that same shtickle. And he says a bit of a doichik. The Gemara is talking about that they didn't give Rishus to make a chaval. And as a son, I take out the splinter, but don't make it bleed. Be careful. And the son never made it bleed. So the only time it's also it without Rishus. But it's with Rishus, the Minchas Chinuch holds mutter. And that's even a bigger heta than the Gemara. He's saying it's mutter Rishus, and in any case, even chatchila. But Lamaisa, it's a chiddush. I told you we saw from the Shiltis and the Turei Even. And Lamaisa, the Paiskim say it's very schwer to be Saimach on the Minchas Chinuch when we have Mashmoyis of the Gemara, not like that. But before I apply it a little more specifically, I must make 2 points, and both are on the checklist before we make them. Number one, this entire issur, agav, the issur of Makkah and Mekalel, only applies to children, sons or daughters. The Meiri and Sanhedrin Pehei spells out that an anikel, of course shouldn't hit a grandparent, that's for sure, but an anikel that wants to make a medical procedure is not a shayla, because only Makkah of imay. And that the Shilas Yavitz base Kuf Chavtes, the Torah Lishma, Reish Samachay, that's the Beis V'chaim, or say this halacha l'maisa. In fact, the Rambam says the issur of Mekal Avim is also only for a son, not for an anikel. Now, this is something that's kedai to mention, to whom may concern when you have an elderly parent at home, and they need occasionally, whether it's a prick of blood or an injection. So for the son to do it is not a chatchila, efshebacha. But very often there's a built-in eitzah. It's called aniklach. If you have an anikel of age that knows how to make a prick, you don't have to be a big doctor to know. But even an injection, if an anikel is trained to do it, so that's the built-in efshebacha. So it's if it's needed on a regular basis or even a semi-regular basis, it's worthwhile to take the oldest anikel, train them how to do it, and they could give the injection, and they can make the prick, and then you avoid any shayla. Also, and this is interesting, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman in Minchas Shloima, Aleph Lamed Beis, he says, although the Paiskim are doichel the Minchas Chinuch, but the Minchas Chinuch is Minchas Chinuch. And he, as other Paiskim recommend, before you make any medical procedure to a parent, get an explicit mechila. Because then, besides everything else, you have the Minchas Chinuch, that Rishus works. So now let's apply it, halacha l'maisa. So first of all, the klal number one is chayme of this issur, the shigas chenek. We're always miyirei hayra'ah, but in this shayla, we sit there. The Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Taka in Minchas Shloima Aleph Lamed Beis, he says it's shayla chamura because the pashtus of the mechaba is that it's awesome. So basically, we have to approach these child with extreme caution. But lemaisa, let's go in order. A parent has a splinter. So the truth is, a splinter has a maila and a chisaron. And I'll tell you, the maila is pashit because it's not a vaday tzaz dam. In Hilchos Shabbos, most splinters are mutter lechatchil take out on Shabbos because it's not a psikresha. If you do it carefully, it won't bleed. So maybe it's not a makavim necessarily, but that's the chisaron of it. Because if he does cause the parent to bleed, he can't say, I was saving their life, I was making a surgery, I was taking blood for them. The bleeding that's involved with splinter is not even the refuah. If you be more careful, it wouldn't bleed. So you can't say it's the refuah. Here it's collateral damage, which is mais yumas. So that's why it's a more serious shayla. A splinter, mitzad echad, if you do it carefully, is fine. But mitzad sheni, it's not the refuah. Hakozas dam, that's the refuah. The bleeding that happens from taking a splinter is not the refuah. So that's why approach with extreme caution. So rule number one, after the acher. Again, an einikel could do it, and I forgot to mention, another the acher would be a child-in-law. Let's say the elderly father has a splinter, so the compassionate, devoted daughter wants to take out the splinter. Stop. Ask your husband to do it. Your husband's relationship is a son-in-law. That's not makav v'imay. So if there's an Adam available, if there's an einikel available, that would be the best course of action. If there's no one else and the parent is bitzar and they want their son or daughter to do it, then do it carefully. Say a tefillah k'tzar, they should be matzliach, and then hopefully it won't bleed. And if it does bleed, hopefully we have the original yisoid that lemaisa rishus would help if it's the efshe ba'acha and then mitztayah. We had an interesting shayla where an elderly mother needed a splinter removed. The daughter was willing to do it, but she said an Adam now. But the Adam says, touch, my shviga, this is not my mother. So he wanted to be machmir and hilchas negiah. So is that considered ef sheba'acha? And he might be right. Why should he touch a woman that's not his mother? So if he refused to do it, so back to square one, she has, the daughter is the only one else that could do it, there's no children around, that might be a legitimate ef sheba'acha. I did see in the Shabbos b'Shabbat, it's page Kufay and Dalit, let's say a man has a nurse, a female nurse, and he has a splinter, any need that he has. So he doesn't want a nurse to touch him, then he holds that's enough, ef sheba'acha, that the son could do it. Of course, the best thing would be if this could be avoided, but if it's not a question of a strange woman touching him, he could say, I don't want a strange woman, and that would be, the son would be mutter. Now, interestingly enough, a serious question, I believe, is a parent has a cut, or after a surgery, whatever it is, and they have to change the bandage. So it's a pretty big procedure. But mustn't, because now it's not bleeding. Something by removing the band-aid, it starts to bleed. So that would be makav v'imay. There's more than a tipas dam that's coming out. Now someone tied it to me, it's not true, but he's not making a new cut. It's just the existing cut that healed partially, and now he's aggravating it. But the issur is not making a new cut. The issur is causing a tipas dam. And again, I saw the Shabbos b'Shabbat in Kufay and Bayis. He writes it briefly, but I think it should be highlighted that sometimes changing a band-aid could be a serious shayla. Especially if it's karvel psikresha that by changing, especially a fresh wound, it's going to start to bleed. So that has to be done by someone else. Again, if no one's around and the parents are mitzdayer, which is not often the case, but this is something you have to say, a'ai de acha. The question we began with, believe it or not, is not as simple as we would like it to be. And that is, can a son give a parent a haircut? So the emphasis, haircut, the bachim that give haircuts today, some of them are very, very much perfectionists, and they want to get the square back, but that should be like as good as Haman did it when he was a barber, and they cut it, and they use the machine to get it, perfect. So then it might be a tipas dam. But our haircut machine, we have a pretty sophisticated machine. Does it make it bleed? Should it bleed? But Reza Pella, the Moshev Zekanim, and this is not a nursing home, Moshev is a nursing home, but this is one of the Rishonim that's on Chumash. It's reprinted in the Oiz V'Had Chumash. It's similar to the Das Zekanim. In Parsha Kedosh, in Perikutes Pasuk, and I quote, this is one of the Rishonim. He says, Kibud, a parent can be Moichel. Ha'avle matzah machal tzarai, u'lechein asel ben l'saper aviv, Shema Yifza Oisai, V'Yitzayer, and for this ain b'mechilasai klum. So this Moshe is again in one of the Baliyat Toises is another direct hit on the Minchas Chinuch, and he says beferish mechila helps, but not for makav v'imay. But it's also troubling that he says a son can't give a father a haircut. I found a later gadol. This is from the earliest Achronim, the Leket Yoisha, Trumas Hadeshins and Hagis Yeredeya Amid. Page 37, and all the prints that they use English numbers, don't ask me why, but it's page 37. He Omar, the Rebbe, the Trumas Hadeshin said, She'ein b'ni rashay legalech zikonai, af b'shani moichel al kvoidai, shemayasa b'chabur. Now this is talking about probably trimming the beard or shaving, whatever he did in those days, I don't know, but it wasn't the hair, it was the zikonai. And he did not allow his son to trim his beard. That's even a bigger chiddush. Now, the emes is, haircutting, in a certain sense, is more of a serious shaila. Because the refuah is not to make the bleed. The refuah, the need is give the man a haircut, don't make him bleed. So maybe they held even a suffix is a problem. Now that's true, that if you want to point to a Rishon and an early Achron, it's also to give a haircut, you have it. And in Derech Sicha, that's Reb Chaim, Kanievsky's Psakim, Parshas Yisroi, it says there that the stipend did not allow Reb Chaim to give him a haircut. He might make a chabur. The only question is, and I spoke to a number of Rabbanim, today's haircutting machine doesn't make a chabur. Now, if you use the take off the blade and the back, you start hacking with the razor part of it, so that don't do. But if you use a good machine, especially if you use the blade to the machine, does it ever bleed? I saw the Shev Rakasi, Aleph Reish Samach, the Shabbos B'Shabbatoi. In fact, he even says that in the olden days they didn't have machines; they used a razor. Of course, not on the beard, on the hair. A razor could make a bleed. The Tzlach in Tshuvas Tzlach, Siman Lamed Ches, he asks from a Gemara Bava Kama Peivav. He quotes this Moshe Zekanim, and he says that the Gemara is that a son gave a father a haircut. So obviously, if you do it carefully, it's not even a suffix psikration. Now, Lamaisa, the minig is lahakal, but be careful. Now, if a father has sensitive skin, then that will be more curved up psikration. And I saw the Shev Rakasi, Taka says that then get someone else. If it's the F Sheba'achar, I saw the Ber Moshe and Dalet Pei Dalet, he says this, the father has chatot and he has some type of problem. He's embarrassed to go to a barber, and he only trusts his son. He says, maybe that's F Sheba'achar. It's a chiddush, the bizayin of the father. He's embarrassed. But he also says the father doesn't want to wait in line in the barber shop. Maybe you want to say a few dollars. So, we call in timer, you have to make sure that it's EF Sheba'achar. Now, another schus that a child has with an elderly parent, that's to cut the elderly parent's nails. It's hard for an old person to do it. Can a son cut the parent's nails? So the chayr, again, typically it does not make it bleed, so what should be the shayla? And Re'ezah, the Leket Yoish, the same Mechaba, in page 83, he says he allowed his son to cut his nails. You'll ask, Manishtana? So it's pashut. First of all, nails is much less of a suffix than getting a haircut. And I saw in the new print of Leket Yoish, he has a lam d'shechap, because really the Leket Yoish was a very prominent individual. So he'll go into the street, can you cut my nails for me, take a person off the street? It's a bazayin for him. Someone's going to cut his nails. But his own son is okay with it. So he was an EF Sheba'achar. Okay. Lamaisa, it's totally in a metzius. Again, if someone has very sensitive nail, ingrown tona might start bleeding, so then you're back to, the halacha, F Sheba'achar. In fact, it's noteworthy, the Shabbos B'Shabbat, they quote a Tshuvas Ravi Avad. Now, Ravi Avad was the shver of the Ravid. People make a mistake. He wasn't the Ravid. It was the shver of the Ravid, the Balasagis on the Rambam. And he quotes the Shiltis about a son making a father bleed. We'll soon see about taking out his tooth. And he says, even for a son to scratch his father's back is awesome. Now, I don't know what made different backs in those days, and the Shtana had backs, I don't know. But apparently he was talking about he has sensitive skin, and scratching caused him to bleed. But today, no one's going to say it's also to scratch a parent's back, so that would be okay. Someone asked me, I don't know what the shaila was, can he take his parents' blood pressure? Now, the truth is, there's no bleeding or even internal bleeding in blood pressure. Now, of course, if you feel a little queasy when it starts to press and it's pumping, But that's no issur. We have to realize that doing what the parent needs is a mitzvah. When it gets to bleeding, we are cautious. So even though it is causing discomfort, but there's no issur discomfort when it's done the tayelis. A more shver shayla, a parent had a stroke, Rachmana litzlan, and they need some very vigorous therapy. Now, therapy is something very challenging. A person that had a stroke, he can't walk, and you have to force them to walk. I can't, you got to do it, and back and forth. The therapist is somewhat like a slave master. Just got to do it. And let's say the son could do it. Can the son be that therapist for the father? So I saw this B'Shem Rav Moshe in the Rishumei Aaron Chelik Aleph Yeridei on our Machaba, and he asked Rav Moshe. Rav Moshe says Avad the son should do it, could and should do it. Why? There's no hakaz, there's no moitzidam. Navas, you have to make a parent, work hard, But then again, I don't think Rav Moshe said this, but I want to say this: the whole yesod of therapy is no pain, no gain. So to make the parent have a little pain is really a lot of gain. So your kavanah is Hashem Shemayim, and you'll be a little more understanding and not as quick and curt like a therapist. So by all means do it. But the yesod is really the same that I mentioned earlier. There's no issur causing agbas nefesh l'tzayrach. The issur is bleeding even l'tzayrach according to the Rif and the Rush. And here's no bleeding. Another interesting question is, Erev Yom Kippur, there's a minute quoted in Shulchan Aruch, Ramo actually, that some people got malchus Erev Yom Kippur. So the question is, can a son give his father, not malchus, the ceremonial malchus of Erev Yom Kippur? So the Shevet HaKasi and Dal Kuf Samach Vav says, although the Ramah in Reish Mem Aleph Sif Hey says if the father did an issur of chayivim malchus, the son can give him malchus, get someone else for the mitzvah. But this Erev Yom Kippur, he says it's not really malchus, there's no bleeding, and it's not a bezoyin. But he says, no, maybe it is a bezoyin. Maybe taka, it's considered bezoyin. You're giving him malchus, you're indicating that maybe he deserves it. So he says, basically, the son should not give the father the Erev Yom Kippur malchus, get someone else. Now I was wondering, this malchus is nicker, it's not a bezoyin, it's a minig Yisrael. But he does add, if there's no one else to do it, then the son could do it to the father, and it brings a raya, interesting raya from Kamad Moirim, many Rebbes, Gedolim, that they asked, they should be given malchus. Who did it? The Talmud, or the Gabbai. What's the heta? Rav Shemachal al-Bezoyin, ein Bezoyin machal. Must be, this is not a Bezoyin. So if it's not shaykh to someone else, let the son do it. I saw an incredible shayla, I hope it's not Nigeya, but it brings out the point in a very exclusive way. A person became frum and became a moyel. It's about tshuva. Moyel is wonderful moyel. Many years later, his father became frum, and his father never had milah. He was an oral kayamav, and he didn't care about it, but now he cares. Can the son do milah on his father? Now, this is not stam hakah, this is a lot of blood. But then again, this is the ultimate tikkun. A person that does milah shlei bizmana on Shabbos is chayiv misa, because it's not a makalkal, it's a tikkun. So how do you look at it? But at the end of the day, it's still a chavala, and if efsheh ba'achal, to get someone else. If there's no one else, and the father only trusts the son, then there's a tat to be mekel. Now, someone thought I meant my shaila was if someone's megayer, and then his father's megayer, that's more common that the father needs milah. But that would be less of a shaila, because katan shenayla dam is not really a problem of a son. I saw, talking about tsar, I must mention this, Rav Nissen Karelitz in Chutshani in Hilchos Kibbudav. He has this following halacha l'mai. He doesn't ask shayla, he says it straightforward. The minig of chapping the afikoimin is an alta minig, it is a minig that you keep up the child awake. But today it became that an older boy, a mitzvah boy and above, steals the afikoimin, and he's a handler. He says, you're not getting it back until the guy promised me. And the father, it's almost chatzos. Chatzos and chatzos her. Business is business. And he caused the parent sorrow. There's no heter for that. And the father's not Michael. The father's pretty upset, but he has to be a sport, so he plays along with it. So please put that on your calendar for Erev Pesach. Tell your children, don't steal afikoim. Now, I wonder if an anikel is any better, because they shouldn't cause grandparents agbas nefesh. But I thought that was very nice the way he looked at it. Also, another point, once we're talking about it, waking up a parent is a terrible aveira. Look what Dama and Sina did, not to wake up a parent. But let's say the parent would want to be awoken, let's say to go to davening, So says the Chayodim says, and others say Avada it's mutter. But the Aruch HaShulchan and Reish Mem, Sit Katan Mem adds, if it's Ef Sheba'acha, do it Adei Acha. Because the Lamaisa, you're waking up a parent. If you could ask the mother nicely, maybe wake up Tati, that's a better idea. I always wonder if I care. The mother was given the job to wake up the husband and said, oh, Yankee, go wake up Tati. That's not a good chinuch. Let the mother do it herself. Because again, let her say, I would love to, it's much easier if you do it, but Kibbudav. I'll do it. Because no issur for the wife to wake up the husband. And Achra in Hichbid, the last group of questions are definitely the most challenging. And that is when a parent needs a surgery or dental work or anything of a similar nature, of a similar serious nature. So the emphasis is, this is mamash our inyan with a very pronounced urgency, because mitzad echad we're talking about shegas chenek, and again a surgery, dental work which involves bleeding. So like the Rif and the Rosh and Pashas the Mechaba, it's shegas chenek. Like the Ramah, it's efedei achar. It's asa. If it's the efshadei achar, it's okay. How do you define efshadei achar? So one thing the Aruch HaShulchan says in Sivan and Reish Mem Aleph, if the son is more competent than any other doctor, that's ef sheba'achar. If the parents know the son is a top-notch doctor, then the son could do any necessary surgery. Now we would have thought that let the parents have betachon and take the second best doctor. You have to have the best doctor in the world. But I think the Aruch HaShulchan understood that be'etzem it's not a ma'aseh issur. Be'etzem it's mutter. We pass like the Rambam. But if after by the acha, so go with the acha. But if he's a better doctor, then it's not an issur. That's what I understand. I mean, there's no mitzvah to having the best doctor in the world. But I guess that's enough to justify, at least according to the Rambam. Now, what's often the case is there are other good doctors, but a parent has confidence in their son, especially a mother. My son, the doctor. I don't trust anybody else. Now, the Aruch HaShulchan is not matter that beferish, because this is not a medical preference. This is an emotional, a psychological, feeling that they feel more confident with the son. There are plenty of good doctors out there, and no one's denying that. So this, I saw the Chelkas Yaakov and Yeridei Kuf Lamed Aleph and the Kinyan Torah and Aleph Tzadik Dal. They say, well, emotional, need is also something. Don't forget, Ruach Ish Yechalka Machaleyu. That's what the Chacham Gal Adam said. Now I know it's not a good dimyan, because that's by a machla and this is by a surgery. But I understand why they were makel. The Minchas Yitzchak and Aleph Chav Zayin is not convinced that that's correct. Because if you got the same treatment, so who says your nervin is an matter? But Lamaisa, we do see some poskim are makel because they're too worried about anybody else. Let's say there is another doctor, but it's a lot of tircha. So that's a good question. What does tircha mean? So I saw again the Shabbos b'Shabbatai points out, the Rambam says Bamed Varmum sheyesh sham achal asoisei aval ein sham achal asoisei mutter. Twice the Rambam says sham. That means the doctor's right there. But if you have to go to a different doctor and it's a big schlep, maybe taka that's considered ef sheba'achar. But he says it's not necessarily true. Maybe sham means sham ba'ois Medina. So fly to Chicago. It's the same country. You're not putting your life in danger by going. So you have to be a little, intellectually honest is important here. But I think the big question is, yes, there are other doctors, no problem. But there's one major chiluk. The doctors charge what the doctors charge, and my son, the doctor, you can't beat his price. So is that enough of a reason? I get plenty of good doctors, but my son is free, and doctors is a lot of money. So here I'll tell you an approach that I saw the Yafilei, one of the Svarish Poskim, Reish Mem Aleph Gimel, and the Gesher Chaim in the beginning of Chelik Beis has a whole discussion about this very shaila, and he says the following: the father tells the son, "Listen, my entire zun, time for you to work. Payday. Let's go. I want a surgery." The son says, "Tata, but the problem, you're a father." He says, "Do what you want. You want to be from, but you're going to pay for it. I'm not paying for it." So the son says, but Kibbudav is Michel Av, right? So who has right? Father told son, go shopping for me. Son says, my pleasure. So son said, can I have your credit card? No, shopping. You said, your pleasure, right? And you'll pay for it. No, that's Michel Av. So how do you look at it? So the Yaful Alev and the Gesher Chaim both say that Lamaisa for the son, it's the Ef Sheba'achar. Because he doesn't have to pay for it. So what's the choice? There's no choice. Father's saying it's you or someone else. So the father's out of it. Now it's his son's lap. It's in his lap, right? For him, it's the Yafshvach, and he could do it for free for the parent. However, the Har Tzvi and Yeridea Kuf Tzadik Zayin quotes this tshuva of the Yafal Alev. He said that's wrong. He says the son has to do it. His frumkeit is not Kibbudav. His frumkeit is his ben ad lamakoim. He gives a mashal. The father calls the son who lives in Flatbush. I need you right away. Could you come over? So the son says, sure, but I'm a little old. It's not hard for me to walk. You'll pay for the car service? No. Walk. I don't mind. I could wait. So it's a famous story of Chaim. You don't want to pay for the car service, so walk. So he compares that to our case. You want to be from at your own expense. Either get someone else, or you have to pay for it. That's what he wants to say. Now, Rav Shlomo Zalman, in that same tshuva that I mentioned in Mincha Shloima, he says, no, it's not a frumkeit of his own. It's a frumkeit of Kibbudav. So after I learned all this, I was pretty confused, but I don't know, what's the maskana? Mitzad Echad, the father wants a surgery, and he puts it in the son's lap. Is that justifiable? Maybe, no. Maybe he'll say, father, be more considerate, and you can't make the son pay for it. But it does seem that if there's a major expense, and the father insists either the son paying for it, or a major expense, then the son could do it. I saw that B'Shem Rav Moshe, and the Svar L'Chayre is, because at the end of the day, that mitzad Allah it's mutter. If it's the Efshe Ba'acham. If this could be construed as a Efshe Ba'acham, we have the heta at least of the Ramah. Now, if someone will say, but Lamaisa, you're talking about Shigas Chenek. Madich for Allah, you have to come a Mainoi. How could you not give up $5,000 to pay for the parent's surgery? If someone that wants to do that, Tavay Love, Kol Birchas HaToiv. The question about cosmetic surgery, and Rabbi Yashav was asked about an Isha, because men don't go for cosmetic surgery, but an Isha wants cosmetic surgery. Can her son, the surgeon, do it? And his answer was, Asa B'Shum Oifen. I looked back and I said, what's pshat? What's so bad? So the hezbah is because the heta is refuah. It's not a refuah. This is purely cosmetic by nature. Now, just to make an aura, I'm not arguing Rabbi Yashav Chas Shalom, but in the Gemara there are two reasons why it should be mutter. One reason is ma'amaka behema l'refuah is mutter av maka adam. Now, like that, it has to be refuah. But the first reason is after achkamoicha. It's not totally in refuah. So maybe like the first reason should be mutter. Maybe you have to have both reasons. But let's move on. A child doing dental work for a parent. Again, dental work often involves bleeding. If there's no bleeding, there's no shaila, but it involves bleeding, pulling a tooth, etc. So this, in the best scenario, all agree lechatchila aydei acher. In fact, the Sheilta says a son to pull out a father's tooth is awesome. Because everybody agrees, machaber ramah, all agree aydei acher lechatchila. If there's no ach as good as the son, or the parents feel no confidence in anybody but their son, so for Ashkenazim, l'chor it's mutter. Now here's another question that I was surprised about, that Rabbi Yashav was asked about a son doing a cleaning on the parent, and he said it's awesome. So again, I imagine this is l'shitase, because the cleaning will cause bleeding, but it's if in the case when it causes bleeding. But it's not a refuah. It's basically maintenance of the teeth. They look nice, whatever it is. So maybe he felt to be mekel, you have to have refuah besides after achgemoich. Now, question about taking a blood sample. The parent has to have a blood test, and there's a big, schlep to go to the doctor or to the hospital. Can a son take the blood? So this is as good as hakozas dam, which is not pashut. But the truth is not as good as hakozas dam. Hakozas dam, taking blood, is the refuah. And here, this is a prelude, this is a hechsha refuah. So definitely, we're going to say, get someone else. Because even hakozas dam, aydei achar. If there's mamish nobody else, and the parents need it, and they have to have a blood test, they have to what's wrong with them, then you can be mekel. It's not worse than taking a koitz. A parent wants to donate blood, and they don't want to have to go down to the hospital. Can the son draw the blood? So this is worse than anything we had till now. Because this is not their refuah, this is someone else. And Rav Zilberstein, in his Sefer, quotes, he says that this should not be done by the son. He's doing a chesed for someone else, but what justifies the son to do that? And I saw in a wonderful sefer, a new sefer, Dudei Arain, Dudei Reuven, I'm sorry, and Sif Katan Lamed Hey on Takanawa Simon, he wonders that Lamaisa, but if Lamaisa it's hard for the father to go and he's going to have to go, would there be a tzad to be makel? And again, and for us, it's a certain sense like a Ritzon Shel Adam Zui K'Voidei. Also, parents that need a daily injection or a daily prick. So the metzias of a prick basically is a little prick, kipshutai, and it causes enough bleeding to be able to test the blood. So this is at least a tipas dam. Also, this is almost always efter de'acher. The son doesn't have to do it. He could have a grandchild do it. It's no big deal. In fact, if there's no grandchild available, he could set it up and ask the parent nicely, would you mind just pressing down? So the parent can make their own prick, as long as it's done right, you know. Now, some parents feel queasy. I should press down myself. They might be scared. Oh, no. If they don't want to do it, they don't want to do it. But if a son is focused on halacha and his parents, he could be after Kaim Shneim. Get someone else make the prick, or even the parent do it. If for some reason it's the Efshtei Acher, so we're back to halacha. Now, usually it's not costly. It's usually Efshtei Acher, and it should be avoided. Again, if there are any around the house, they should be trained once how to do it right, not quickly. Do it slowly, and that's the Efshtei Acher. If the parent needs an injection, we call it a needle, a shot, but it's an injection. So here, it's not a prick that's just a testing. This is their refuah. But lamaisa, in injection, there are really two different types. There's one that goes into the skin, which typically does not cause bleeding, and one goes into the vein that causes at least, like we said, the internal bleeding of the black and blue. So that's a serious shaila. If no one's available to do it and the parents need it, then we have the Ramah to be Seimecha. Better would be to train someone else in the house, again a son-in-law or an anical, to do it and avoid these shilas. Then you have no shilah whatsoever. The point is that this is, again, an unprecedented shir. We never gave a shir about chenek bizman hazeh. And it's interesting, the Shulchan Aruch says a son that hits the father is chayev misa. Now, typically the Mechaba does not speak about chayev misa because it's not negay bizman hazeh. The Rambam speaks about chayev misa. And I believe the Mechaba used that lashon to remind us of what we're talking about. So it is an errands to Shaila, but the son has to know what he's doing, and the ik is we should do the Ratzon Hashem. I'm going to talk to you all.
Shem irgend shir like we get gehört, aber es für today's shir on Kibbudav kishagoyim lem tzal tevosam. Shem after Kaddish was supposed to say sikum. We gaan niet met elkaar zeggen, maar dat zeg ik boven de zaak is dat het zo veel geven ter met de snem aan de gafes en man zit jagel ter wiade. Okay, but the Sikkim is not going many time, and it's l'tevasam, l'tevaseinu.
Okay, Rabbi said what we learned today, Chamur Sheba Chamur, is a new facet of it, that this sugya of the chenek, the shigas chenek, or chiyav chenek, that moitzi dam, even a tipas dam, even internal bleeding, Rachmana's son, mois yumas. The Mechas Chinuch has his big chiddush that if reshus is given, there's no issa. Most strongly reject that chiddush, but we did see that if there's a medical need, we basically have a sugya. To understand the sugya, the Gemara's flow, first the Gemara says it's mutter because that's what they need, and then it's their rotzen, and then the Gemara says ma'isurav that they didn't do it. So some Rishonim learn that basically la maskana it's asa even or medical need, and that seems to be the shita of the Mechaba, and some Sfaradim are machayish for that. The Ramah seems to be makel like the sheet of the Rambam, that both parts of the Gemara are true. Ideally, it should be avoided because you're talking about chenek, a shigas chenek. If it's efshar de ba'achar, especially if it's a suffix that caused bleeding, which is not even part of the refuah, taking out a splinter, efshar ba'achar. And even a refuah that's needed, if someone else could do it, so you accomplished the need and you avoided shigas chenek. And Rav Shlomo Zalman says even us Ashkenazim should worry about the mechaber shita. It's not a kleinikite. But lamaisa, if it's efshar ba'achar, then Ashkenazim certainly are mekel based on the Ramah. Now, although of shemachal akvayde machal, but on bezoyin and on hakah or klala, the consensus of Paiskim is alaikim and chaschinach, and mechil does not help. The best eitzai the acha could be an anakel or a child-in-law that knows what they're doing. That would be instead of the child, the son or daughter doing it and getting into the sveikas. Taking out a splinter should be done by someone else. If there's no one else and the parent is sour, do it very carefully. Changing a band-aid, again, should be avoided because more often than not, if in a fresh wound, it causes new bleeding, additional bleeding, not necessarily a new makkah. A haircut, a son could give a father a haircut. Don't use the sharp part and don't get a perfection in the back. Just do it regularly. Cutting nails is even more mutter, unless of course there's a special condition. Scratching the back today is mutter. Taking blood pressure is mutter. Therapy, do it berachamim, but it's better than someone else that doesn't have rachmanis. It's not an issur because the tsar is the gain. Erevim kippah malchus, try to get someone else. Mila, a son to a father, mila. Try to get someone else. Stealing the afikoimen under bar mitzvah only and not the handling that causes tsar. Surgery is a major shayla like dental work, which could be expensive, but if there's an agreement that they're willing to pay the extra difference for the son to avoid doing it, tavalei and bracha. If there is no alternative, let's say the parents do not trust anybody else, they don't have confidence, or a great cost, there is a tzad to be makel. Cleaning, cosmetic surgery seem to be a way of looking at it. If it's not l'refuah, get someone else. Taking a blood sample that's needed for the refuah, if there's no one else available, they could do it. A just blood test, blood donor should be done by someone else. And a prick and an injection, both of them should be avoided, done by someone else. If there's no one else to do it, la'alach it's mutter.
Good.